Hello, my name is Jenna. I'm 62 years old, and this is the story I never imagined I would have to tell. A few months ago, my only son threw a wedding, an event I had waited my whole life to witness, but I wasn't invited. Instead, he called me the night before and said the words that shattered something inside me. My wife said she can't stand you. Your dog's stench makes her want to vomit. After everything I had done for him, after every sacrifice, that was all I meant to them. So in a moment of clarity born from heartbreak, I made a decision. I canceled the honeymoon he hadn't paid for. I auctioned the house I still legally owned, and I erased him from my life before he could destroy what little was left of me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the dignity I had forgotten to protect. And yet, as the dust settled, I realized this story had only just begun. There were secrets beneath the surface, truths darker than hurt feelings, and choices I never expected to face as a mother. What happened next changed everything. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. I raised my son, Marcus, alone in a small town in Oregon, where the rain never quite seems to stop and memories cling to the air like mist. After my husband died, he was only 38, and Marcus' just 8-hour house became quieter than any home should be. I remember the first night after the funeral. Marcus asleep on the couch with his tiny fists clenched, and Max, my loyal dachshund puppy back then, curled against my ribs as if he understood I was about to break. For 30 years, everything I did revolved around my boy. My dreams slowly shifted into his needs: school supplies, basketball fees, braces, college. I watched every milestone with the kind of pride that aches, the kind that grows heavy when you realize you're living your life through someone else. And Max was there through every storm. A warm weight on my lap during sleepless nights. A small heartbeat reminding me I wasn't entirely alone. I never imagined the day would come when my son's life would move forward without me in it. But last Tuesday, while scrolling through social media with a cup of lukewarm tea in my hand, I saw the unthinkable photos of Marcus in a tuxedo, standing under a floral arch beside a blonde woman in a lace gown. My son, married, smiling, a whole celebration. And I had not even known it was happening. The caption said the happiest day of our lives. I stared at the screen until the image blurred. My body felt disconnected from itself, like my heart had been unplugged. I don't remember making the call, only hearing Marcus's voice when he picked up cold flat, like he was speaking to a stranger. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. He sighed in that dismissive way he used to when he was a teenager. "Mom, Amanda didn't want you there. She said—" He paused but didn't soften. "She said she can't stand you. Your dog's stench makes her want to vomit." Dog stench? Max was sitting by my foot at that moment, looking up at me with those warm brown eyes that had seen every version of me: widow, mother, volunteer, silent sufferer. When I heard those words, something inside me shifted, not with heartbreak, but with a clarity so sharp it felt like inhaling winter air. For decades, I had given everything to Marcus. I co-signed his first house loan because he said he wanted to build a family future. I paid for half his honeymoon deposit because he said he was struggling financially. I held the deed to the cabin his grandfather left him because, Mom, paperwork stresses me out. I stood there in my kitchen, the faint smell of coffee grounding me, Max nudging my leg as if sensing that the universe had tilted. "Marcus," I said, my voice strangely calm, "I understand completely." He sounded relieved, even annoyed. "Good. Glad you're taking this well." And he hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stood still, feeling something inside me settle, not pain, but resolve. A lifetime of overlooked sacrifices clicked into place like puzzle pieces, forming a picture I'd refused to see. That night, after the sun dipped behind the pines, I made 3 phone calls. Not out of revenge, something deeper, quieter, a reclaiming. The first was to my lawyer, a patient man who had handled my husband's estate years ago. The second was to the travel agency. The third was to the real estate auction company. Max sat beside me, his chin resting on my knee, while I reviewed documents with trembling fingers. The lamp on my desk cast a warm cone of light over the paper's legal agreements, authorizations, things Marcus had assumed I'd never touch. I whispered to Max, "It's time, boy." He thumped his tail softly. By midnight, every decision was finalized. The honeymoon was canceled. The house was set to be auctioned to cover the loan he had defaulted on without telling me. And the trust, the trust he thought he'd inherit, Isley, was officially being dissolved. But Marcus didn't know any of it. When I finally crawled into bed, Max curled into the crook of my arm like he had when he was tiny. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the rain tapping gently against the window. There was a weight in my chest, yes, but beneath it something steadier, the sense that for the first time in years, I was choosing myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of everything. 2 days passed in a strange kind of quiet, the kind that settles not because life is calm, but because a storm is circling just outside your door, waiting for its moment to break you open. I felt it in my bones, in the way Max stayed unusually close, resting his head on my knee every time I sat down. Dogs always know. The first morning, my phone began buzzing before the sun even rose. At first, I thought it might be telemarketers, or maybe Helen checking in early, but when I looked at the screen, it was Marcus. Missed call. Another. Then another. By noon, he had called 17 times. 17. And each time, I let it ring. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I knew that if I heard his voice, if he shouted or accused or cried, I might crumble, and I couldn't afford to crumble. Not now. Not after what he had done. Not after the words he had thrown at me as if I were nothing but an inconvenience in the way of his new life. I placed the phone face down on the table, inhaled deeply, and focused on the sound of Max softly snoring beside me. I kept reminding myself, sometimes silence is not cruelty. It is necessary distance. By the end of that first day, my social media feed was flooded. Amanda had posted a dramatic paragraph on her page, lamenting their ruined honeymoon. She claimed the travel agency had lost their reservation and called the situation unprofessional, heartbreaking, and devastating. Someone had added a crying emoji. Someone else suggested they sue. She didn't mention me, not directly, but the timing was too perfect, too convenient. In the comments, friends speculated, blaming the company, blaming fate, but never blaming the truth. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something deep inside me ache, not because of her lies, but because my son was part of that world now. A world where appearances mattered more than honesty, and where pain could be dressed up as sympathy bait for strangers online. The next afternoon, Helen knocked on my door. She didn't even wait for me to fully open it, she just stepped inside, holding a plate of lemon bars wrapped in plastic wrap. That was Helen's way of signaling that the conversation ahead would be uncomfortable. Sugar softened the blow. "Jenna," she began gently, setting the plate down. "People are talking." Her eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were dimmed with concern. "They say you did something terrible to your son." For a moment, I felt the familiar sting of shame-an old reflex, something that had been conditioned into me through years of mothering a child who could manipulate emotions without even trying. But then the shame passed, like a cloud moving away from the sun. I reached down and scratched Max's ears. He leaned into my touch, grounding me. "I only did what was necessary, Helen," I said. She studied me for a long moment, searching my face. Maybe she saw the weariness there, or the quiet resolve. Maybe she understood more than she let on. Finally, she patted my hand and said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm right next door." After she left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the wall clock. I thought about the last 25 years, years spent at the community center organizing food drives, delivering boxes of groceries to families who had nothing, setting up winter coat exchanges, teaching financial literacy classes on Tuesday nights. I believed in people. I believed in second chances. I believed in helping others because life had been cruel to me once and kindness had saved me. But Marcus, what he did crossed a line I didn't know existed until he drew it himself. There's a moment in every mother's life, I think, when she realizes her child is not a reflection of her values, but a person making choices she cannot control. When night fell, the doorbell rang. Not gently, insistently. Max barked, ears pointed sharply, tail stiff. I walked to the door just as the mail carrier placed a certified letter on my step. He waved and hurried back to his truck. I could tell from the envelope what it was. Legal notification. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was an official letter stating that Marcus had been notified. The house he'd been living in was being auctioned to cover the loan he'd defaulted on. The loan I had co-signed. The debt he had hidden from me. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not satisfaction. Something closer to grief. A grief made of clarity. And then came the sound I had been unconsciously bracing for. Tires screeched against my driveway gravel. Max jumped to the window, barking ferociously. His whole small body trembled with alertness. I peeked between the curtains. Marcus's car was parked crooked, headlights flooding my front yard. He slammed his door and stormed toward the house, his footsteps pounding like thunder. I stepped back. He didn't knock. He pounded fists against wood, loud enough to shake the frame. "Mom! Open the damn door!" he shouted. "Open it right now! You ruined my life!" Each word was a dagger. Not because of what he said, but because of how familiar it felt. How many times in the past I had opened the door, soothed him, fixed his mistakes, made myself small so he could feel big. Not this time. Max jumped onto my lap as I sat down in my armchair, his small, warm body pressing into mine. His heartbeat matched mine fast at first, then slowly calming, as if urging me to breathe. I stared at the door as he screamed words I never imagined hearing from my son. Words that carried all the venom of a stranger. But I didn't move. I didn't respond. I let him shout, let him spill his anger into the night, until eventually his voice cracked, then quieted, then faded altogether. Finally, I heard his car start, the engine revving angrily before disappearing down the road. The house was silent again. I rested my chin on Max's head and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time, I almost believed it. The next morning, the sky hung low and gray, a soft drizzle blurring the view outside my windshield as I pulled into the community center parking lot. I'd worked there for 25 years, feeding families, sorting donations, teaching small workshops on budgeting and job applications. This place had always been my refuge, a space where I could believe in people again when life made it difficult. Max trotted beside me on his leash, his tail wagging with innocent enthusiasm, unaware that the world I'd carefully built was beginning to shift under my feet. I welcomed the routine, the smell of old cardboard boxes, the echo of footsteps in the gymnasium, the hum of volunteers chatting as they sorted through crates of produce. It grounded me, made me feel like I still had a place in this town, even if my own son had pushed me out of his. I had just signed in and started unpacking canned goods when a woman approached, slim, sharp-eyed, dark hair, pulled back into a clean ponytail, wearing a volunteer shirt, but carrying herself like someone used to authority. "You're Jenna, right?" she asked, setting a box beside mine. Her voice was calm, warm even, but there was a subtle alertness behind her eyes. "I've heard your name around. I've helped half this town." I smiled politely, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. Compliments always embarrassed me. "Oh, I don't know about half. Maybe a handful," I murmured. She offered her hand. "Detective Sarah Chun. I'm off duty today. Thought I'd put in some volunteer hours." "A detective?" I blinked, surprised. Officers and detectives sometimes came through during the holidays, but rarely during the quieter months. She knelt to pet Max, who wagged enthusiastically. "He's sweet," she said. "He's my anchor," I replied before I could stop myself. We worked side by side, sorting canned vegetables, lining them on long folding tables. The rhythm of the task settled my nerves. But Sarah kept glancing at me as if she sensed something beneath the surface, like she'd walked into a story already unfolding and was waiting for the right moment to ask about it. "You look tired," she finally said gently. "Rough week?" The question loosened something in me. My fingers trembled slightly as I placed a can of peaches on the table. Max lay at my feet, pressing his warm body against my ankles as though trying to hold me together. "I've been better." I swallowed hard. "My son, things are complicated right now." They didn't interrupt. She didn't rush me. She just kept working beside me, her presence steady, patient, like she had all the time in the world to listen. And so I told her quietly at first. Then, with growing difficulty about the wedding I hadn't been invited to, the calls I didn't answer, the screaming at my door, the community whispers, the choices I had made out of necessity and self-preservation. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking so badly, I had to set down the last can just to steady myself. Sarah exhaled slowly, her expression darkening into something more serious than sympathy. Something heavier. "Jenna," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I felt the air shift. Even Max's ears perked, sensing tension. "We've been investigating a series of financial fraud cases," she continued, her voice low enough that only I could hear, "and your son's name came up." My heart stopped. It didn't beat slower. It simply stopped, suspended in my chest like it had forgotten how to function. "What? What do you mean?" My voice cracked on the last word. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to a page filled with tight handwriting. "He's been scamming elderly investors through a fake real estate company," she said. "We have documented transactions, witness statements, bank transfers routed through shell accounts." I gripped the edge of the table. The room felt far away, voices muffled, fluorescent lights blurring above me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Marcus wouldn't. He's not." But the words wouldn't come, because a part of me, deep down, already knew. I'd seen signs, the sudden expensive clothes, the lavish honeymoon he couldn't afford, the resentment toward anyone who pressed him for details, the way he dismissed honesty as old-fashioned. Sarah's voice softened, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. "We have evidence," she said, "but we need more to prosecute." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingertips into my temples. The boy I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed sleep and health and dreams for, was a criminal. Not just misguided, not just entitled, but someone who preyed on the vulnerable. Someone who betrayed the very values I built my life around. Max whimpered quietly, climbing halfway into my lap as if trying to shield me from a pain he couldn't fix. His warmth steadied me in a way my own breath couldn't. Sarah moved a little closer, lowering her voice even further. "If you help us," she said gently, "we can make sure he faces justice. But it means—" She hesitated, choosing her words with care. "It means testifying against him." I stared at her, feeling the weight of every year of motherhood pressing hard on my chest. Testifying against my child, the child I had held through nightmares. Kissed, scraped knees for, defended at parent-teacher meetings, cheered for from bleachers even when he barely glanced at me. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. Max pressed his nose to my hand, letting out another small whimper. He knew. He always knew. This was the first twist I hadn't seen coming. Not just rejection, not just cruelty, but danger. My son wasn't simply ungrateful. He wasn't simply lost. He was hurting people. Real, innocent people. And I couldn't protect him by staying silent. Silence had enabled enough harm already. I looked at Sarah, my voice trembling but steadier than I felt. Tell me what you need. The drive to the mountains felt longer than ever, even though I had taken that road hundreds of times. The sky above was a heavy, navy blue, moonless, the kind of darkness that presses against the windows and makes you feel smaller than you are. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on my knee whenever the road straightened. His presence grounded me, kept me from drifting too far into the panic swirling in my chest. I couldn't stop hearing Sarah's voice repeating the same words. He used your name. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles throbbed. I kept imagining Marcus signing forms, attaching my identity to his crimes as effortlessly as he used to write his name on school assignments. I wondered whether he felt anything: guilt, fear, hesitation, or if the boy I raised had disappeared long before I ever noticed. When I reached the cabin, the air was icy and still. The pine trees looked like dark silhouettes guarding a secret none of us were ready to face. I stepped out and pulled my jacket tighter, my breath forming thin clouds as I exhaled. Max trotted ahead, nose low, checking the perimeter like he sensed we were stepping into something dangerous. Inside, the cabin smelled the same as ever: old wood, pine cleaner, and the faint memory of summers long gone. I stood there a moment, letting myself remember happier times. Marcus running barefoot across the deck, begging me to watch him skip rocks in the lake. I wondered how that child had become this man. I forced myself to move. Sarah's instructions echoed in my mind. We needed files, proof, anything that could help stop him before he destroyed anyone else. I went down the narrow staircase into the basement, Max following close behind, his tail stiff and alert. The basement was colder than the rest of the house. When I pulled the chain to the light bulb, a weak yellow glow filled the space. I scanned the shelves and the corner cabinets, unsure where to begin. Then I noticed the boxes stacked behind the old workbench ones I didn't recognize. Marcus hadn't lived here in over a decade. Why would he store anything here? My stomach tightened as I dragged the first box forward. Inside were folders, hundreds of pages, glossy brochures, printed contracts, fake company logos, false investor statements. My name was everywhere, stamped onto pages as guarantor, as if I had been standing beside him approving every scheme. I opened another box, more papers, more lies, more victims. Max sat beside me, ears lowered, sensing something inside me was breaking. I ran my fingers along the edges of the documents, feeling the weight of betrayal as something physical, sharp, jagged, cold. One envelope sat near the bottom of the second box, addressed in delicate handwriting. I pulled it out and unfolded the letter inside. As I read it, a painful knot formed in my throat. It was from an elderly widow, 80 years old, who had trusted such a polite young man with her entire life savings. She wrote that she was grateful Marcus had promised to take care of everything because she didn't have children of her own. She believed him. She admired him. She trusted him more than she trusted herself. Max nudged my arm when I started to cry. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the grief wash over me. Not just grief for the stranger, but grief for the son I thought I knew. For the future I had imagined for him. For the mother I had tried to be. When I could breathe again, I wiped my face and took out my phone. My hands trembled so violently I had to hold the documents flat against the floor to photograph them. Page after page, contracts, signatures, victim lists, bank transfers, fake deeds, false promises. Entire lives Marcus had stolen without looking back. Max suddenly lifted his head and growled softly. A low, warning sound. Before I could ask what he sensed, I heard it too. Gravel crunching outside. Tires rolling over the front drive. Headlights flashed through the gaps in the basement window. My heart stopped. Marcus. Amanda. Here. I shoved my phone into my jacket and swept the most important papers into my bag. Max followed me as I tiptoed across the basement, each step loud in my ears, even though I tried to move silently. I eased the door open and peered up the stairs. Light from the front room flickered across the ceiling. Voices drifted down, familiar, sharp, unmistakable. "Did you leave the porch light on?" Amanda asked. "No," Marcus said. "But it doesn't matter. She won't be here." I swallowed hard and pulled Max toward the small storage closet near the staircase. It was barely big enough for both of us, but I squeezed inside, pulling the door shut until only a thin sliver of light remained. My heart hammered so loudly, I was afraid they'd hear it. Footsteps entered the cabin. I recognized the sound of Marcus's boots. I pressed my back against the wall of the closet, clutching Max's collar to keep him still. He trembled, sensing my fear. Then Amanda's voice drifted into the hallway, dripping with the kind of disdain she never bothered to hide. "Once your mother's gone," she said, "we'll take everything. The cabin, her savings, all of it. She barely uses any of it anyway." Marcus laughed softly, a cold, tired sound I didn't recognize anymore. "Yeah, it'll be easier once she's out of the picture." My hand flew to my mouth to keep from gasping. Max pushed his head against my leg, trying to steady me. I realized then that this betrayal ran deeper than I imagined. It wasn't just fraud. It wasn't just greed. My own son had been waiting for me to disappear. I don't know how long I stayed frozen inside that cramped closet, my arms wrapped around Max as if holding him could anchor me to sanity. His body was warm against my legs, steady and loyal in a way that soothed something deep inside me. A part I hadn't realized was still desperate for comfort. Outside, their voices rose and fell, each word slicing through the darkness with chilling clarity. At first, I thought I misunderstood. Stress and fear can distort meaning, make you hear things that aren't there. But as the conversation unfolded, the truth became undeniable, grotesque in its simplicity. Amanda's voice sharpened as she spoke into her phone. "Yes, the wedding was rushed. Why else do you think I pushed it through so fast? Once the DNA proves the baby is yours, we'll file for divorce." My hand tightened around Max's collar to stifle the sound that rose in my throat. I felt him press closer, sensing my panic the way only he could. A man's voice crackled through the speakerphone, smooth, confident, amused. "Your sister's plan is genius," he said. "Marry the Mark, get pregnant with my kid, then clean him out before he realizes what's happening." Mark. He called my son a Mark. I felt something inside me snap, not out of sympathy for Marcus, not exactly, but out of a deep, aching recognition. He was being played, manipulated, used. And yet, this wasn't redemption. It didn't erase the truth of who he'd become. The boy I raised wasn't innocent. He was dangerous and calculating, willing to exploit anyone to get ahead, including me. But hearing him spoken about like prey, it twisted something in me. Amanda's voice softened only slightly. "He's obsessed with appearances. He'll refuse to believe it's not his child. He's too proud to question me publicly. By the time the truth hits him, it'll be too late." The man laughed. "Then we'll all get what we want. Just stick to the script." I felt sick. My heartbeat pounded so fiercely it echoed in my ears. The walls of the closet seemed to close in around me. I pressed my forehead against Max's fur, whispering silent breaths to stop myself from making any sound. A con within a con. A predator being hunted by predators. A perfect poisonous circle. Marcus and Amanda moved deeper into the cabin, cupboard doors opened. Footsteps thudded above us. They weren't looking for documents. They didn't even know they existed. They were too wrapped up in their own twisted plans. Eventually, the front door shut and their voices drifted farther away until silence settled over the cabin again. I stayed in the closet a few more minutes, afraid they might come back. My legs were shaky as I stood, and Max stayed pressed to my side, refusing to budge until I steadied myself. When we finally stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a shock. My breath trembled as it left my lungs. The sky had darkened even more, heavy with clouds that reflected none of the stars. Everything felt dim, like the world itself was holding its breath. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there without starting the car. My hands were shaking so badly the keys rattled when I tried to fit them into the ignition. Max jumped into the back seat and rested his chin on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. That small gesture broke something open inside me. I covered my face with both hands and cried. Not the kind of cry that releases you, not even the kind that hurts in a cleansing way. This was the quiet, hollow kind, where the tears fall because there's nowhere else for the pain to go. Every betrayal in that cabin replayed in my mind. Every scheme, every lie, every choice that brought us here. Max made a soft sound, a low whimper of concern, and nudged his head against mine until I finally touched him. His presence reminded me I wasn't alone. Even in the darkest moments, he stayed. When my breathing steadied enough to try again, I started the car. The engine hummed softly, a small mercy in the stillness. I pulled out of the driveway, my hands gripping the wheel as the cabin shrank in the rearview mirror. All the way down the mountain road, I kept replaying what I had heard: Amanda's calculated cruelty, the man's dismissive amusement, Marcus's ignorance of the trap he was walking into. And yet, the truth remained. He had chosen deception long before she arrived. He wasn't simply unlucky. He wasn't innocent. He was the author of his own darkness. And now he was caught in someone else's. By the time I reached the edge of town, my tears had dried into tight, salty tracks on my cheeks. My body felt drained, brittle, like a single wrong word could shatter me. But beneath that exhaustion was something steadier. A current pulling me forward. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I had the truth. The documents. The recordings. Everything Sarah needed to finally make a case strong enough to hold. I parked outside the community center, Sarah's makeshift evening office, and rested my hands on the steering wheel. For a moment, I let myself breathe. Really breathe. Max licked the side of my face as if urging me forward. "I know," I whispered. "We have to do this." The air was cold as I stepped out of the car, but the trembling inside me wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. I pushed open the door to the community center and walked straight toward the small office Sarah used after hours. The lights were still on. Through the thin glass window, I saw her working at her desk, papers spread out around her like she was building a map of truth, one scrap at a time. I knocked. She looked up. Her expression softened when she saw me and changed instantly when she saw my face. "Jenna?" she said, standing. "What happened?" I swallowed hard, gripping the strap of my bag. "I have everything," I said, "and you need to hear what I found." Max sat beside me like a silent witness, his presence grounding the whirlwind inside me. This was the second twist of my story. My son was both villain and victim, but that didn't erase the damage he'd done. It didn't absolve him. It didn't make this easier. I stepped into the office and placed the evidence on her desk, my hands finally steady. "Let's finish this," I said. I thought agreeing to help Sarah would feel empowering, like stepping into a role I'd been preparing for without knowing it. But the truth was simpler and far more human. I was terrified. Not the sharp, immediate terror of danger, but the heavy, sinking kind that settles in your bones and whispers all the things you're too afraid to say out loud. I was 62, tired in ways that didn't show on the outside, and standing at a point in my life where I should have been planning quiet mornings with Max, not wearing a wire to trick my own son into confessing his crimes. But Sarah was gentle and steady as she guided me through it. She assembled her team with the calm precision of someone who had held broken people together before. "Jenna, we need you to wear a wire and meet with Marcus," she said. Her voice carried a kind of respect that made me straighten my spine. "You're the only one he'll be honest with." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Honesty hadn't been part of our relationship in years, but I nodded. "Get him to talk about the fraud. About Amanda, about the forged documents. We need his confession recorded." "I understand," I answered, though my voice shook. "I'll do it." Sarah placed a hand on mine, grounding me. "I know this is hard, but you're stronger than you think." I didn't feel strong. I felt like an exhausted mother trying to salvage the last scraps of something she once believed was unbreakable. But strength sometimes grows quietly, in the empty places left behind by disappointment. 2 days later, after rehearsing the plan until I could barely hear my own thoughts over the pounding of my heart, I dialed Marcus's number. My fingers trembled so badly I had to press my palm against the countertop just to steady myself. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp. "What do you want?" There was so much anger in those 4 words. Anger and fear he still didn't recognize in himself. "Son," I said softly, letting the fragility seep into my voice, "we need to talk. Come to the house alone." Silence. A charged kind of silence that crackled through the line. "Fine," he muttered. "I'm on my way." Hanging up, I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Max pressed his nose into my leg as if reminding me he was here, grounding me with a kind of loyalty only a dog can give. I knelt down and held his face between my hands. "You stay close to me, okay?" I whispered. When Marcus arrived, his car skidded slightly on the gravel, announcing his anger before he even reached the door. He slammed it behind him and stormed into the kitchen, eyes blazing. "What is this?" he snapped. "Another lecture? Another punishment?" I lowered my gaze, playing the role Sarah asked of me. "Marcus, I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I overreacted. I was emotional. I'm older now. I don't always think clearly. I can reverse everything." The words tasted like ash, each one a betrayal of the mother I once believed myself to be. But I needed him calm, vulnerable, talking. His posture shifted just slightly, but enough for me to notice. His jaw unclenched, his shoulders eased, and something tired flickered behind his eyes. We sat at the kitchen table, the place where I had once served him birthday cakes, after-school snacks, warm meals when the world felt cold. Max curled beneath my feet, quiet as snowfall, his body tense and alert. Marcus tapped the table impatiently. "Look, Mom! You have to understand. I needed that money. I had debts, investments, opportunities." "What business, sweetheart?" I asked gently, guiding him like Sarah taught me. "Help me understand." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face, and then he spoke. Really spoke. Not the defensive scripts he'd rehearsed for months. It's not the arrogant self-justifications he threw at the world. But the truth, raw and unfiltered. He told me about the fake real estate scheme, the shell companies, the mass emails written to look like personal outreach. He talked about the elderly victims, men and women my age, some older, who only wanted security in their final years. "They're desperate," he said, shrugging as if it were an unfortunate fact of life. "Desperate old people believe anything if you tell them you care." The words sliced into me, deeper than any betrayal before. I felt Max press his body against my leg, sensing my pain, my anger, my disbelief. But I kept my expression neutral, just as Sarah trained me. My heart could break later. It could collapse into itself once the door closed and the recorder shut off. "Is that why you forged my signature?" I asked softly. He didn't even hesitate. "Yes, it was easier. People trust your name. Your reputation helped sell the whole thing, and there it was. The last piece Sarah needed." I felt the shift in the air before I heard the sound, some subconscious recognition of movement beyond the walls. Marcus kept talking, oblivious. digging his own grave with every careless admission. He leaned back in his chair, finally relaxed. "You don't have to worry, Mom. Once this all blows over, we'll be fine. Amanda and I have plans. Big ones." The door crashed open before I could respond, the sharp sound slicing clean through the room. Marcus jolted upright, eyes wide, as Sarah stepped in with 3 officers behind her. "Marcus Reed," she said, her voice firm and clear, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of financial fraud, identity theft, and elder exploitation." He stared at me, betrayal, confusion, fury flooding his face in waves. "Mom? What did you do?" My throat tightened, but I forced the words out, my voice barely above a whisper. "What? I had to." The officers moved in, cuffing him as he struggled, his protests echoing against the kitchen walls. Max growled, low and protective, but stayed by my side just as I whispered for him to do. As they led Marcus out of the house, he turned back one last time. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something break inside him. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. The kind he used to feel as a child when he woke from nightmares and ran to my bed. But I couldn't save him now. Not from the consequences he built with his own hands. Not from the truth that had finally caught up with him. When the door clicked shut behind them and silence filled the room again, I let out a breath so heavy it felt like releasing years of held pain. Max placed his head on my lap, and I stroked his fur, whispering, "It's over, boy. It's finally starting to be over." When the officer stepped fully into the doorway, everything seemed to shift in slow motion. Marcus, who just moments before had been arrogantly explaining how he manipulated elderly people, suddenly froze. His mouth dropped open slightly and all the color drained from his face. It was as if the truth had finally caught him by the throat, holding him still. Sarah's voice, steady and unshakable, filled the room. "Marcus Reed, you are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse, multiple counts." I watched the words hit him like blows, each one carving a deeper crack into the carefully constructed image he had built of himself. His eyes darted wildly between Sarah, the officers, and me, searching for some explanation that would make all of this unreal. Finally, they landed on me, and I felt my breath stop. "What did you do?" he asked, but it was more accusation than question. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with disbelief and betrayal, as though I had been the one scheming in shadows while he lived an honest life. I didn't look away. This time, I owed him clarity, even if he hated me for it. "I chose justice over blood," I said softly. And the strangest thing happened. I heard strength in my own voice. Real strength. The kind that comes not from confidence, but from finally refusing to drown in someone else's wrongs. His face twisted, rage, hurt, confusion flashing in chaotic bursts. For a heartbeat, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who scraped his knees and came running to me for comfort. But that child had been gone for a long time, replaced by the man in cuffs standing before me. The officers guided him toward the door. His footsteps dragged, the reality sinking in piece by piece. And then, just when I thought the worst of the moment had passed, I heard tires screeching outside. Amanda's voice pierced the air before I even saw her. She stormed into the yard, wild-haired and furious, waving her phone like it was a weapon. "This is illegal. This is harassment. We'll have lawyers on you by morning," she shrieked. She pushed past an officer and tried to reach Marcus, but Sarah intercepted her with a firmness that didn't rise to anger. "Mrs. Coleman, you need to step back," she said. "I won't step back." "You idiots don't know who you're dealing with," Amanda shouted, her voice cracking under pressure. "This is a false arrest. Marcus didn't do anything wrong. Tell them!" She turned desperately toward him, but Marcus didn't say a word. He couldn't. The weight of reality had locked his tongue in place. Then Sarah delivered the second blow, "Amanda Coleman," she announced calmly. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud." For the first time since I met her, Amanda's bravado faltered. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, panic flickering behind her eyes. You can't arrest me. I didn't do anything," she stuttered. "We have recorded conversations, financial connections, and statements from victims," Sarah said. "Please turn around." Amanda's shock lasted less than 10 seconds before it ignited into rage. "I knew it," she screamed, pointing at me as the officers cuffed her wrists. You old witch! You'll regret this. I'll destroy you. I'll take everything you have." The words hit me like physical strikes, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. Max stepped in front of me, growling low, his body stiff and protective. And all I could think was how strange life was, that in the moment of my greatest heartbreak, it was my dog who stood guard over the pieces of me. I watched silently as the police guided Marcus and Amanda to separate cars. The flashing lights painted my front yard in shades of blue and red, colors that made the night feel unreal, like a dream too vivid to be ignored. Max pressed against my leg, sensing every tremor in my body. I rested a hand on his head and whispered the only words I could manage. "It's okay. I'm here." As the cars pulled away, the flashing lights carving streaks across the pavement, I realized something unmistakable. I had just watched my only son taken away in handcuffs. Neighbors began emerging slowly, drawn by the noise, the sirens, the tension crackling in the cold air. They gathered on the sidewalk in small clusters, whispering behind hands. Some looked curious, others worried, a few silently judgmental. But all of them watched me, standing alone in my doorway with Max by my side. Helen, my neighbor of nearly 20 years, rushed toward me with hurried steps. Her face was a mixture of shock and concern. "Jenna, what happened?" "My word!" The whole street could hear the shouting. Under different circumstances, I might have babbled apologies, tried to explain things, tried to keep appearances neat and tidy for the sake of reputation. But tonight was too heavy for performance, too raw. I met her eyes and simply said, "The truth happened." She stared at me for a moment, her expression softening into something like sorrow. She didn't ask more. Perhaps she understood there were wounds too fresh to touch. She just placed a hand on my arm, squeezed gently, and walked back toward the gathering crowd, dispersing them with quiet authority. When the last police car disappeared down the street, the silence that followed was suffocating. The night air felt heavier than it had in years. I closed the door, leaning my forehead against the wood as Max circled anxiously around my legs. I made my way to the living room and sank into the armchair that had become my refuge in all the storms I never asked for. Max climbed onto the ottoman, nudging his head into my lap. I tried to speak, to say something to him, to myself, to the empty room, but nothing came. And then the crying began. Not the soft tears of disappointment or the quiet sorrow of aging, but the deep, wrenching sobs that shake your body and hollow you out from the inside. I cried harder than I had since the night my husband died. Grief poured out of places I hadn't touched in years. Grief for my son, for the life I thought we'd have, for the dreams I curated so carefully on his behalf. Grief for the boy who once laughed in the backyard, chasing Max through falling leaves as if joy were endless. But even through all the grief, one thing did not appear, not once. Regret. I had chosen justice. I had chosen truth. I had chosen the innocent people my son had preyed upon. And I had chosen myself. When the tears finally slowed, I pressed my cheek into Max's fur, breathing in the warm, grounded scent of him. "We're going to get through this," I whispered, voice hoarse but determined. "One way or another, we will." Max let out a soft sigh, resting his head on my knee. For the first time that night, I felt the faintest flicker of something like hope. The news broke faster than I could process it. Within 48 hours, my quiet little street in Oregon felt like the center of a storm I hadn't invited, but had somehow summoned. Every channel, every local website, every radio station repeated the same headline: "Elderly woman exposes son's fraud ring." Hearing the words out loud, "elderly woman," still pierced me with a strange mixture of embarrassment and reluctant pride. But hearing exposes son was a different kind of ache, one that burrowed under the ribs and lodged itself there, pulsing. By the second morning, reporters lined the sidewalk, their vans humming. Cameras perched on shoulders, their breath fogging the cold air as they whispered into microphones. Max barked non-stop, pacing the living room window like a soldier guarding a fortress. Every time a camera shutter clicked, he growled, ears flattened, tail stiff. "Easy, sweetheart," I whispered, stroking his neck as another flash lit up the curtains. "They'll leave eventually. Storms always pass." I wasn't sure I believed it. One reporter shoved a microphone toward me when I stepped onto the porch to get the mail. "Mrs. Holloway, did you intentionally set up your son? Do you feel guilty handing him over to police?" Guilty. The word was a stone. Heavy. Familiar. I lifted my chin and answered only one question in the calmest voice I could manage. "I believe in rehabilitation and second chances," I said, hearing the tremble in my own throat. "But I also believe in protecting the vulnerable. No one, family or not, gets a pass for harming people who trusted them." My words played on the news that evening. I watched myself on TV, looking older and more fragile than I felt. Yet beneath that fragility, I saw something else, something that surprised me. Steadiness, like a tree that had learned to bend in too many storms to ever break again. Then the calls began. The widow whose savings Marcus had drained. Her voice cracked as she said, "I prayed every night someone would stop him." "You did. You did what the rest of us couldn't." The retired school teacher who'd invested her pension into Marcus's fake real estate project. She cried as she spoke, her grief mixing with relief, like two rivers joining into a wider, quieter stream. Then a veteran who told me, voice rough and tight, "I felt ashamed for being fooled. But hearing your story, your courage, gave me back a piece of myself." And strangely, their gratitude softened something in me that had been rigid for years. A part of me I thought had rotted under disappointments, betrayals, and the loneliness of aging. Their voices didn't just thank me, they stitched me back together. Each call mended a tear I hadn't even realized was still bleeding. I remember sitting with Max on the couch afterward, his warm head on my thigh, and letting myself breathe for what felt like the first time in days. The world outside was frantic, chaotic, hungry for sound bites, but inside, in the quiet of my little home, I felt the gentlest tug of healing. Then the phone rang again. When I saw Sarah's name on the caller ID, my stomach tightened. Detectives never called just to chat. I answered with a soft, "Sarah? What is it?" There wasn't even a pause. "Jenna, we need to talk." Amanda made a deal. My heartbeat stuttered. A deal? She's testifying against Marcus. And she's revealing something we didn't know. Something in her tone, a carefulness, a weight, told me the ground was about to shift again. I swallowed. What could be worse than everything he already did? On the other end, Sarah exhaled, slow and steady, like she was bracing me through the phone. "He was planning to have you declared incompetent." The words didn't make sense at first. They floated in the air, untethered, absurd. Declared. Incompetent? Why? "To steal your assets legally," she said. "He had a doctor lined up, paid off, the paperwork was halfway done." For a moment, everything inside me went silent. Not shattered, just silent, like a candle snuffed out, a soft, breathless darkness. Max lifted his head, sensing the shift, and nudged my arm with his nose. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the slow, painful bloom of realization. He was going to take everything? My voice cracked. Everything his father and I built? Everything I spent a lifetime protecting. Yes, Sarah said. He wasn't just trying to hurt strangers. He was preparing to erase your autonomy, legally, permanently. It would have been easier, maybe, if he had simply been cruel, or lost, or misguided. But this was something else, calculated, premeditated, intimate in the most terrifying way. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an attempt to rewrite my future, to reduce me to a signature he could forge. I closed my eyes, breath shaking. Why, Sarah? Why would he do that to his own mother? That, she said gently, is something only he can answer. But deep inside, where mothers keep all the memories of first steps and first words and scraped knees and bedtime stories, a quiet truth rose. Marcus had been slipping away for years, one small choice at a time. And I had been clinging to the idea of him, not the reality. Max nudged my hand again, his warm breath grounding me, his eyes soft with the kind of empathy only animals seem to master perfectly. I leaned into him, fingers buried in his fur, and whispered, "It's okay. I'm okay." And I was. Somehow. The world outside was loud, chaotic, demanding. But inside, sitting on that couch with my dog pressed against me, I felt something steady returning, something like dignity, something like reclaiming the parts of myself I'd almost surrendered without even noticing. The storm was far from over. But for the first time, I understood something essential. I hadn't destroyed my family. My family had destroyed itself. And I was saving what pieces of myself I still had left. The trial stretched across 3 long weeks, each day blending into the next like a slow-moving storm that refused to pass. I sat through every minute of it, my hands wrapped around Max as he rested in my lap. The judge had granted a therapy dog exemption after seeing the medical letter. Sarah helped me obtain a small mercy in a place that felt built entirely from cold marble and colder truths. Max would curl against me, his heartbeat a steady, grounding rhythm in a room filled with tension sharp enough to cut skin. Sometimes, I found myself stroking the fur behind his ears just to keep my breath steady. He was the only warm thing in that courtroom. Marcus never looked my way, not once. He kept his gaze pinned to the table or the floor or the wall behind the judge anywhere but me. It was strange. I had imagined this moment so many times, imagining he'd meet my eyes with anger or remorse or even hatred. But instead he gave me nothing, a void, as if I were already a ghost. Witness after witness took the stand. And with each one, a new layer of truth unfolded, undeniable, irreversible. The widow spoke first. A woman in her 70s with trembling hands and a necklace she kept touching, like a talisman keeping her upright. Her voice cracked as she said, "He called me Grandma. He said he'd invest my money safely." She paused, swallowed hard. I trusted him. I thought he saw me as a person, someone who mattered. I closed my eyes, the words slicing through me. Max pressed closer. Then came the retired teacher, the veteran, the couple who'd lost their savings, each describing how Marcus had charmed them, reassured them, lied to them. Some cried. Some shook with anger. Some looked at the defense table with disappointment so deep it seemed to echo. Marcus kept staring down. The worst moment came when Amanda took the stand. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, the result of a plea deal that traded truth for leniency. She laid out every scheme, every step, every conversation. She described the fake pregnancy plan in detail, even referencing the conversation I'd overheard in the closet. Listening to her was like watching the same wound being reopened again and again. Not because she lied, but because she told the truth. When the prosecutor asked her about the plan to declare me incompetent, the room fell silent. Even the judge's expression shifted just slightly, as though the cruelty surprised even her. "He paid a doctor," Amanda said. "Cash. He said he was tired of waiting for his inheritance. He wanted control sooner." I felt heads turn toward me. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on Marcus, even though his were fixed on the table. I wished foolishly that he would look at me then. Just once. But he didn't. On the third Thursday of the trial, they called my name. I stood slowly, Max staying behind with Sarah in the front row. The courtroom seemed bigger from the witness stand, the air thinner, as if grief itself had its own gravity. The prosecutor asked the first question gently. "Mrs. Montgomery, how would you describe your relationship with your son before all this?" I breathed in. Memories flickered, his small hand in mine, birthday candles, scraped knees, teenage arguments, the last Thanksgiving we'd spent together, and the years that followed, when distance quietly replaced affection. "I loved my son," I said, feeling the words tremble inside my chest, more than life itself. My throat tightened, but I continued. "But I love justice more. I love the people who trusted him, who were hurt. I love truth more than I love silence." The prosecutor's next question felt like a hand reaching straight into the center of me. "Do you regret turning him in?" I didn't look at Marcus. I looked at the jury, at their eyes, at the space between us all that felt filled with something raw and honest. "Every single day," I said. "Every day I wake up and wish this wasn't my life, that the son I raised had made different choices, that this pain wasn't mine to carry." I let out a breath that had lived in my chest for months. But I would do it again, because it was right. Because protecting the vulnerable matters more than protecting my pride, or my heart. The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney didn't waste time trying to soften the blow. He stood, straightened his suit, and began painting me as a bitter woman seeking revenge, a mother angry at being excluded from a wedding, a woman using the law to punish her son for emotional wounds. I listened without reacting. I had learned in these months that silence could be as strong as any argument. But the community didn't stay silent. Character witnesses filled the courtroom, a steady stream of faces from my past 25 years at the community center. Parents, volunteers, seniors, students who were grown now. People I had hugged, counseled, fed, comforted. Helen walked to the stand in her Sunday dress, her voice steady but fierce. "Jenna Montgomery is the most compassionate person I know," she said. "She would never hurt anyone without cause. She helps people even when she needs help herself." She shot the defense attorney a sharp look. If she did this, it's because she had no choice. I felt tears slip down my cheeks, not from shame, but from something gentler, something like being seen. The final day arrived. The jury was dismissed to deliberate. The hours dragged slow and heavy, like dusk refusing to become night. People chatted softly in the hallways, footsteps echoing, the hum of vending machines filling the quiet moments. Sarah sat beside me, Max sleeping at my feet, his breathing steady. I stared at the clock, the second hand clicking like a heartbeat. 6 hours passed. 6 hours of uncertainty, memory, hope, guilt, and something like acceptance settling into the spaces inside me that had once been raw. When the bailiff finally opened the courtroom doors and called everyone back inside, my legs felt unsteady, as though they remembered too many storms at once. The jury filed in, eyes unreadable. Marcus still didn't look at me. I folded my hands in my lap, Max pressing against my legs, and waited for the truth to arrive one last time. The words felt heavier than the air itself. Guilty on all counts. They echoed across the courtroom like a bell tolling for something that had already died long before this moment. Marcus received 8 years. Amanda received 5. A quiet murmur spread through the room, then fell away into a silence thick with finality. As the deputies approached to escort them out, Marcus finally lifted his eyes toward me. For the first time in months, he really looked at me, not with anger, not with that cold indifference he'd held on to through the trial, but with something fractured, something painfully human. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling in a way that made him look like the little boy I once knew. The boy who used to run into my arms after falling off his bike. The boy who used to bring dandelions into the house and call them flowers. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could even breathe. "I forgive you, Marcus," I said softly, my voice breaking on the edges, "but you have to earn redemption. It's not a gift I can give. It's a path you'll have to walk." He blinked hard, as if trying to hold onto my face long enough to bring it with him into whatever came next. Then he was led away, the sound of his shackles rattling with each step. I watched him until the door closed, swallowed by a place I couldn't follow. Outside the courthouse, the sun hit me like a warm hand on my shoulder. Victims gathered around me, their eyes red, their smiles wobbly, their gratitude pouring out in shaky voices. Some hugged me, some simply held my hand. One whispered, "You saved us." Another said, "You saved yourself too." For the first time in a long while, I let their words in. A week later, the local newspaper printed a feature about the case. The headline read, "Woman who helped hundreds, helps hundreds more." It felt strange seeing my face in print, my story laid bare, my pain turned into something public and symbolic. But the reporter had captured something honest. This wasn't a story about betrayal, but about responsibility and healing. The community center where I'd worked most of my life received donations in my name to help fraud victims, people seeking justice, rebuilding their lives, learning to trust again. Standing in the office one morning, reading the letters attached to the checks, I felt a wave of something warm and quiet passing through me. Purpose. That was the word Sarah used when she hugged me one evening. "Purpose grows where pain used to be," she'd whispered. And she was right. 6 months passed before I received a letter from Marcus. I recognized the handwritings, lanted, inconsistent, a mix of confidence and hesitation. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, his words spilled across the page. "Mom, I'm taking classes. I'm getting therapy. I've been reading books about accountability. I finally understand what I did not just to strangers, but to you, to the people who loved me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to learn how to become someone who might." I held the letter against my chest, my throat tight, my heart heavy with a mix of sorrow and hope. That night, I wrote back, "I'm proud of you for starting, son. Healing isn't a moment, it's a journey, and it will take time. But I believe people can change when they're willing to see themselves clearly. Keep doing the work. I'm here." On my 63rd birthday, Helen organized a surprise party at the center. I knew something was strange when she insisted I wear a dress she had bought on a whim, and when she kept checking her watch with a conspiratorial smile. But nothing prepared me for what I saw when I walked inside. More than 200 people filled the decorated hall. Former students, volunteers, neighbors, friends, even people I hadn't seen in over a decade. There were homemade banners, cupcakes, candles flickering like stars, laughter spilling through the air. When they shouted, "Surprise!" I put a hand to my mouth, stunned, overwhelmed, humbled to my core. Max stood at the front wearing a navy blue bow tie, wagging his tail like he'd organized the entire event himself. The crowd erupted when he barked, and several people rushed over to pet him as if he were the honored guest. As I walked through the room, people hugged me, thanked me, shared stories about times I'd helped them, comforted them, encouraged them. Listening to their memories felt like walking through my own life from the outside, witnessing the moments that had shaped me as much as I had shaped others. And then, standing there surrounded by all those faces filled with love, gratitude, and genuine affection, I felt something profound settle inside me. I had lost my son to his own choices, but I had gained something too: clarity, purpose, strength, a community that had quietly held me through the storm without asking for anything in return. I realized I wasn't defined by what had happened to me, nor by what my son had done. I was defined by what I chose to do afterward. I would continue protecting others, guiding them, advocating for them. And when Marcus was truly ready to change, ready to confront his choices, ready to grow, I would meet him there. Not as his victim, not as his adversary, but as his mother. A mother who believed love wasn't just comfort, it was accountability. That night, after the party ended and the world fell quiet again, Max and I sat on the porch. The air was cool, the sky painted with stars that flickered like distant promises. Max rested his head on my lap while I sipped tea, feeling the warmth spread through my hands. For the first time in years, peace settled over me, not as a visitor, but as something permanent, something earned. And with that peace came a gentle, hopeful thought. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning again in a new way. If you felt moved by this journey, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and join me for more stories of resilience, healing, and hope.